Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 211, Smashing Cultural Barriers in Classical Music, with Babtunde Akinboboye. Known online as Babtunde Hip Hopera, this week's guest may look like he's just out there having fun on TikTok, but a closer look shows an artist doing innovative and incredibly important work, bridging the gaps between musical worlds. From West Coast hip-hop fan to opera singer, this week's guest has a journey of fusion of genres and cultures that's shaking up the music world, kind of like kimchi on tacos. His unique blend of opera with hip-hop beats highlighted in a viral performance of an aria mashed with Kendrick Lamar's Humble has earned him a dedicated social media following and sparked conversations about the future of classical music. In this podcast, Tunde and I explore how his work challenges the elitist perceptions of classical music and addresses the cultural barriers that make it feel inaccessible to many. We discuss the balance between preserving tradition and embracing change, the role of education in making classical music more inclusive, and the need to break down labels that segregate music by race. Our discussion offers fresh insights into how classical music can evolve to connect with a broader, more diverse audience. So tune in and have your thinking stimulated and challenged, and then, of course, weigh in yourself with your related ideas and experiences on Facebook in the Choralosophers group or over on Substack at choralosophy.substack.com. Ludus, the platform trusted by thousands of organizers to power their event ticketing, marketing, and fundraising, has just upped its game with an incredible new feature, volunteer management. Now you can streamline your volunteer coordination like never before. Volunteers can easily sign up for opportunities and shifts online while you effortlessly approve sign-ups, track hours, and manage your volunteer team. Say goodbye to volunteer management headaches and hello to seamless coordination with Ludus. Try it at ludus.com/choralosophy and revolutionize your events. We all love to travel with our students, but we definitely don't love planning a trip. I know I've been there as the point person for details, and it is a nightmare. Forms, payments, fundraising, it's a never-ending task that takes away from doing what we love. That's where Kaleidoscope Adventures comes in. They've been planning performance trips for more than 30 years and handle all the details from start to finish. And one of the best parts about Kaleidoscope, they have crowdfunding options for every traveler. Contact Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com to find out how they can take your travel beyond expectations. Underwriting and crucial support for this show comes from listeners themselves who choose to subscribe on Patreon or now on Substack. Subscribers get access to the private podcast feed as well as my Google folder full of goodies and much more. The producers on Patreon are Danelle Eckert, Jonah Clixbull, Angie Schilling, Max Jackson, David Kowalczyk, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Venture Studios. A quick note of self-consciousness on my part. I recorded this episode while traveling, and I was using my road kit, and I had some problems, so it's not quite up to the standard that I hold myself to. You're going to hear just fine, though. All right, everybody. I am here with Babtunde Akinboboye, who I found on TikTok with his fascinating, awesome, entertaining, but also educational TikTok channel where he educates people, but also entertains people using opera, using crossover art between classical singing and hip-hop and a variety of other things. I really think it's an awesome channel, and I'm super excited to pick your brain. So Babtunde, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you start out by sharing with people the things I didn't just tell them, your background, your training, and then how did you get to what you're doing now, and to kind of describe your professional life, if you could.
Okay, I'll try and keep it succinct. It's kind of a ride.
That's
so
okay.
I was born in the U.S., but I did grow up in Nigeria. My family's born and raised Nigerian, and I lived there till I was about 13. Then I came to the U.S. All the while I lived in Nigeria, at some point I became a huge fan of hip hop, namely West Coast hip hop. I became obsessed with it. That was all I listened to, not really interested in R&B, just hip hop. When I moved to the US, my sophomore year in high school, one of my friends I like to say he tricked me into joining the choir. He just asked me to sign up for the men's ensemble class with him. I didn't know what that was, but he said it was an easy A, and all our other guy friends were already going to be in it. So we signed up, showed up, realized it was a singing class, and I freaked out. But we started, I stayed in the class. I was going to leave, but all my guy friends were already in the class and sitting next to me. So none of them were leaving. So I was like, okay, let's make this happen. But I ended up falling in love with it. I at that point, my love of music was hip hop and like choral classical music. And so at that point, I decided like, okay, I want to be a choral singer. I want to sing in choir for a living. I love this stuff. I'm obsessed. And on the road to that, while I was at my junior college, I was getting a voice lesson, and the voice teacher suggested that I consider opera, which was very foreign to me at that point, and I was very resistant. I'll say that. And we went back and forth, and he convinced me. He taught me a few vocal techniques, and la turned into la, and I was like, okay. There might be something to this, and he talked me into doing a competition, and I won the competition. Then he pulled this trick on me. He very dramatically, opera singers, very dramatically closed the piano lid and said, I think you should pursue a career in opera. And I said no. And he said that he doesn't suggest this to all his students, but everyone he has suggested it to that has pursued it has been successful. And so I said, all right, I can't argue with that. Let's go down this road. And so I applied to Cal State Northridge for the vocal performance program, became the opera singing degree, got the degree, started working as an opera singer. But meanwhile, all this time, I still had this love for hip hop as well. And so coming to opera very late, as you know, I had my first opera voice lesson in my 20s. I think what a lot of people do when they come to something new, they find the relationships with stuff they're already familiar with to kind of give them an anchor point. And because a lot of my music understanding and familiarity was with hip hop at the time, it was very easy for me to see a lot of relationships with opera and hip hop. I didn't even really have but before I came to classical music, I didn't understand harmony. The group Boyz II Men, I didn't know why they had 4 of them. I didn't realize that other parts were going on besides the melody. I didn't hear music that well. I just really was focused on the elements that are more important in hip hop. And so because I had that filter and was able to see those relationships, I always kind of had this hope and desire for someone to combine the two, for someone to make operatic hip hop or some other combination of popular music and hip hop. And so it was something I always toyed around with in private, until one day I posted a video of me doing it publicly. It went viral, and it led to me kind of getting a social media following, and here I am.
That's incredible. And so when that first viral video, what exactly were you doing in that video? Could you describe kind of what the performance was like?
Yeah. It was, I think it was a result of me coming out of a rehearsal, and I still had the aria of Figaro's aria from the Barber of Seville stuck in my head. And I was listening to Humble by Kendrick Lamar. And so I sang that aria over the beat for Kendrick Lamar, and I made a video of me doing it. And I posted that online. And I remember I posted it on my personal Facebook because my affection for opera and hip hop and the combination was something I kind of kept private. I didn't really share with my opera colleagues. And so when I posted on Facebook, I just posted on my personal Facebook, not even my professional one, because I didn't want it to get to them. And the next morning, it had gone very viral. I had within the week, I heard from Ellen, America's Got Talent. Time Magazine wanted to interview me, and there was this all this outpouring of comments and people saying that they love this stuff. They want me to do another one. This is really great. This is really impressive. But what was surprising to me is how much people actually liked it and wanted me to do more. And so, so I did. That video was just me driving in my car with my phone mounted up, just me singing along with the beat and performing it in a way that felt fun for me. Combining opera and hip hop, the style of music, I call it hip opera. And so and it just seemed, opera, hip opera. And so if you're looking for me online, I'm Babtunde Hip Opera.
That's awesome. Is it okay if I share with the audience a video from your TikTok that has an example of you doing this?
Sure.
Okay, so this is one of your, I think you're advertising like a tour or a live performance or something.
An opera singer, but this is what I do. For a sec. I see that I got y'all bobbing your heads. Ain't no stopping this yet. Y'all gonna rock? I'm gonna rock a little bit. Hey! And I'm coming to do this.
And then and there you stop and talk about a tour. So tell us a little bit more about, like, if someone were to come see you live, would they be seeing, you just describe it. What would we see if we came and saw you live?
Well, if you came and saw me live, you would be hearing me sing a lot of arias from operas, a lot of very recognizable ones in a very hip hop style. And so the beat is hip hop, the performance style is hip hop. I'm telling the same stories usually in the opera, depending on what's going on in that scene that the opera aria is taken from. However, I'm performing it in a way that I like to think a hip hop artist would perform it live on stage today for a big audience.
Yeah, that's very cool. Now, I'll have to share, like, the real reason that I asked you to come on and join me, as you might have picked up, this is a choir director, music educator podcast. Most of the audience for this show are music educators. And when I first saw your channel, my first thought was, I want my boys in my chorus class to see someone cool doing stuff like this, and crossing the bridges of genre, of time, of continent. But this is just such an incredible example of the power of music's ability to cross borders. Now, when you first did your little viral cell phone video, I imagine you were just doing it, for fun in that moment. But it's got to have turned into something more of a mission for you now. Is that fair?
Very much has become a mission for me. When I first posted it, I really posted it for my own amusement and anyone else who thought might feel the same way.
Yeah.
I did not expect people to actually enjoy it and want more of it as just music, unironically, which felt great. And so, I think I forgot what your question was exactly.
Just thinking about, like, how it's become a mission for you rather
than
just something.
And so after doing it and it becoming, or after putting it out and people asking for more of it as as just music that they want to listen to in the gym, where they're driving, whatever, I realized that for the first time in my career as an opera singer, I was putting out performances that I felt people genuinely wanted more of, and not so much just to support me, which is how I have felt with a lot of my operatic performances before, my standard opera performances. And so I realized a number of things. One, people want to enjoy this style of singing more than they feel they can. And something about creating this with the hip hop element and adding something I think is familiar to them has made it to where they feel like they have permission to enjoy it in a way that doesn't, clash with something internally for them.
I want you to say some more about that. Specifically the idea that people want to enjoy and appreciate this type of music, meaning classical opera. I would even throw in some types of choral music, orchestral music, but they don't feel like they have permission. I think I know what you mean, but I want you to say more about what you mean.
Very much. I feel like because of how this art form started and the communities in the cultures that it thrived in the beginning, I think it's still being held. For opera, started in the Medici family courts. Very exclusive, high-end, high-brow events. And I think an element of that has still remained as part of the culture of this music, classical music, choral music. Because we perform this in the ways that we do, where they're sticking as close to tradition, as I would say, as possible, I think it's made it to where people who aren't already familiar with those traditions from old feel like it's not for them. They see the way people are dressed for, to perform it and to attend it. And they don't already have those outfits in their closet, or
Right.
they don't feel like, it's not part of, it's something they can't relate to when they get there. They feel they may hear something that thrills them in a way they want to respond the way they respond today to music they enjoy, but they find it's not appropriate in those settings, and now they're learning that, okay, there are things I don't understand. If this were for me, I would understand it, because everywhere else I go to enjoy, if I go to a movie theater, if I go to a concert, if I go to a lounge, I understand it, I get it, I don't feel out of place. And I think because of the way this music is being, I'll say very gently, being cared for today, I think it has made it to where people who hear it and want to enjoy it feel like, as a regular person who is not part of whatever they would consider an elite class, they feel like it's not for them, even though they enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, and just so put your mind at ease, you don't have to say things gently on this show. It's kind of not the vibe. You feel free to, if you think it, you can say it. It's up to you. But
Right.
so I think what I want to throw as an idea, and I want to get your reaction to it, is that some of that gatekeeping and some of that tradition that goes into, I think, all of these classical genres. There is a class aspect of it, like you just described. Of course, there is a race aspect of it that you have talked about on some of your other videos. But I also think, and you feel free to disagree, as I said, I also think that it's oversimplifying it to just say, if we were just say, well, it was just something for white people. Because it's not, number one, and it's also,
Right.
it wasn't even for most white people.
Right.
It was for a very particular set of elite, aristocratic, like you said, the courts, people who were able to have favor in the courts and own land and all these things. So we're talking about a relatively small percentage of even the European population in the early days of some of these classical art forms. And so what I think has happened over the years is that that we have tried to maintain. Well, let me put it this way. We have tried to have our cake and eat it too in classical music, which is that we've tried to maintain that sense of pomp and circumstance and highbrowness and like high level craft cocktail of the music world,
Mhm.
while also complaining that more people don't come.
Right.
And we don't see how those two things are in conflict. Thoughts about that?
Right. I've had that dilemma often, and it kind of came to a head with a conversation with someone who essentially told me that this is high fine art. It's not for public consumption. And then I asked them, why do you advertise it to the public? Why do you want them there so much? Why is apparently the business model for a lot of these organizations that run classical music in general, that perform classical music and present it, why do they rely on the public? Or at least they want to. And so I figured that first, those of us in the classical music industry have to have a very honest conversation about what is it that we honestly want to do with this music? Or in my opinion, what I think is more honest, what is the purpose or intent of this music? What is it for? In my personal opinion is, I like to say that I think the first music was, I don't know, some caveman who heard some repeated sounds and it felt good. It made them feel a certain way and they wanted to repeat it, or they wanted to hear it again or mimic it. And that's why I think to this day, whenever we hear good news that isn't even related to music, we say it's music to our ears because we hear it, it makes us feel a certain way. And the other thing we know that does that is music. And I think that our job with this music is to make people feel a certain way, like a pleasant feeling, or just feelings. I think our job is to entertain people. Now, I think the art form was really good at doing that for a long time. I think choral music, instrumental music, classical music, from the earliest time, there was a relationship with what was popular musically and the music continued to evolve. I like to say within opera, that's why Baroque music sounds completely different from Mozart, and Mozart sounds completely different from Gershwin, because there was this evolution with the music, and it's very easy to track that it's in relationship to whatever was happening outside of the church that the people in the rough parts of town were listening to, slowly made its way into the opera. And then the new operas had that popular element, and it kept doing that for a certain time. And then at a certain point, we stopped and we started going backwards. And I like to say that if we could resurrect Mozart today to see what opera looks like in 2024, he'd be furious. Because it looks like the stuff he would expect, the future, and it feels like we're very, very deliberately trying to get as close to the past as we can,
Right.
And it's hurting us.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of having the cake and eating it too idea I was trying to express, and you have said it in a different way, which is that we're trying to preserve an element of the past because some of us in classical music believe that that's what people want when they come, is they want to feel like they're going back in time. And and I think that's true for some people, but I also feel like what you're doing, taking these operatic arias and intersplicing it, so to speak, or singing it over hip hop beats and then rapping in the middle and all these things, is what I think you're doing. Maybe even a metaphor is you're giving people that permission you were talking about earlier to find something that they like about this classical genre that they don't know, because you're serving it to them on a plate that they already recognize. Do you find that is how it ends up playing out for most of your audiences?
I think it's exactly that. Not to be diminutive, but it's like feeding a toddler some new food, but using a container or a dish that they're familiar with already. They're a lot more, it's a lot easier. I mean, I think with music, we're talking about a primal part of our minds. And I think it's important if you want people to enjoy it, do what you can to meet them where they are.
Yeah. Yeah. One other element to this, and I want to get your take on it, is that I've always tried to encourage my colleagues, when we think about this term classical music, which has its own problems because, is it a time period or is it a big overarching genre that includes people making classical music right now? Well, then it's not the time period anymore, all that stuff. But what I try to encourage people to think about is that at its core, the things that we tend to call classical music have one really important thing in common, and I think it gets missed by a lot of people, which is that the music we tend to call classical music comes from a relationship typically between a teacher and a student. Don't forget, it pays to listen to this show if you are a music educator. The list of discounts and benefits for listeners just keeps growing, so your checklist for back to school means getting your sheet music at graphitepublishing.com or endeavormusicpublishing.com, sight reading materials from sightreadingfactory.com along with your student memberships every time you renew, acquire folders and other classroom materials from mymusicfolders.com, and now, most recently, your sub-plans, your ready-made activities and assessments related to music theory can be generated for you with your 3minutetheory.com membership. All of these great vendors accept the Choralosophy discount code. When you check out, you're going to get money saved for your program that helps you take your school year farther. So make sure you hit all of those websites, and it supports this show. So the music is learned from teacher to student, and that could be orchestral music, playing the violin, singing classical music, singing in a choral ensemble, all those types of things. And so when you go and you consume that art form, it presupposes that you've been taught to hear certain things, like you just described, with the Boys to Men example. You hadn't been taught to listen to that 4-part harmony and all of that stuff. And then once you were taught to hear it, you could hear it, and then you appreciated it in a different way. And so I think we miss that connection a lot, because when we then go into the community and perform, and we're trying to reach audiences that have not been educated in the type of music that we're trying to do, and then we forget we've been educated in those things, and so we do the great choral anthem or we do the great operatic aria, we take our bow, and we don't understand why people aren't going crazy for it because I just sang my ass off or whatever, and oftentimes I think it's because they don't know what to listen for, and we aren't willing to teach it to them as part of the performance. We expect them to know. and like all the right things to listen for. And I think this is what partly why we get this like elitism label that gets thrown on classical musicians. Thoughts?
I absolutely agree. I think interestingly, so when I hear things like that, I wonder why wasn't that an issue in the past? Like, how much was the public educated? And I realized that we're still, in my opinion, it's still happening. Just classical music didn't come along for the ride. Back in the day, I don't think a lot of what people understand, the populace understood about classical music, they didn't have to sit in the classroom to learn. It was just known from it being in relationship to the music they all listen to today or in those days. And I think the same thing is happening today. Whereas, for example, you take a hip hop song, a brand new hip hop song, you play it for a fan of popular music today. If they're like listening, dancing along, and there's a certain part of the song where the beat drops, like drops really hard, there's a good chance that the person will see it coming and be able to hear it. Not because they sat in a classroom and were taught after how many measures that would happen. No, because it's been part of the thing. So if this popular music were integrated into what we call classical music today, when they get there, they'll already feel like, oh, I understand this. I know because it's in relationship to the music that is taught today, that is being listened to today. And actually, I want to tie that to something else I wanted to say last time, the other part of what you were saying.
Yeah.
I think that we worry about, I found with what I'm doing, or every time I've seen, like, speaking of opera, something new happen where they've made like a newer version of opera, it almost gets recategorized as rock opera or pop opera or something else different. And I think the worry is that if we do something new, it'll kill off the old stuff. Whereas I think that's not true, because when La Boheme came out, we didn't throw away Handel's Messiah. We didn't throw away Dido and Aeneas. The greats will still stay, but we get to have new, exciting things. So I think for the people who loved La Boheme, when they went to listen to Dido and Aeneas, since I'm using that one, there was some stuff they're not going to get right off the bat. Some stuff that the more educated, the more familiar with Baroque's the more familiar with Baroque you were, the more likely you were to get. And I think the same thing is true with, or should be true with, classical music today. There should be still new, exciting stuff that the public doesn't have to be taught to be able to appreciate, doesn't have to have some understanding to be able to appreciate just by being a music listener, they'll get today. And if they want to delve back into the classics, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really well said. I'll throw in one aspect to this too that
Please.
Might be missing, which is that you mentioned it to my idea that why wasn't that lack of education so much of an issue in the past? And I would only that would be my one disagreement with what you said. It was an issue. You have to remember, 99% of people weren't being educated at all in Europe for like 400 years. It was that elite fragment of the population. And if you were, say, the child of a noble in Italy in 1600 something, you were receiving a music education, and you were probably the only one. Like your family in the court was probably the only one. The rest of the people were working the land, and they were your peasants and all that kind of stuff, and they were quite literally living in the mud. And so when we kind of grew up, I would say historically in classical music, I think that was that part that we were trying to preserve. It was that sense of elitism, because we thought it was a selling point. We thought we could sell people on this idea that by coming to the opera, you middle class American are now one of the elites. Thoughts?
I think what I was saying, or the point I was making with that, is like, yes, I do agree. Like what you're saying, I know that to be true. However, you didn't have to be that educated elite to enjoy the music. The common peasants, when they saw it, it thrilled them. They were excited. They showed up for the concerts. You just put a poster up, they were there. They didn't have to get formal education in that style of music to be able to enjoy it, because at that time, that style of music had a close relationship to essentially what the peasants were listening to and the elite. Like, however, to perform it, or
Yep.
to be a part of it, you had to be an elite. You had to be born into it. And that I agree. They're still trying to preserve the barrier of entry to to perform this music professionally, or the barrier. Yeah, the I think it's still very much. They would like it to stay. They would like that element to stay a part of it, where I don't think it is necessary or helpful anymore.
Yeah. Did you happen to come across a historical drama series called The Gilded Age that was on HBO last
Oh
year?
my gosh. I did it for a while, but then I was getting inundated. So I was like, okay, I'll check out an episode. I became obsessed. I watched every episode multiple times.
Okay, so did you get to the part where they're dealing with the Met Opera versus the New York City Opera or whatever? I think that was what it was.
Yeah, New York City Opera.
Because I feel like if anyone in the audience has not seen that show, that really tells the story of what we're talking about right now. It very, I think, very accurately describes this very on purpose attempt to preserve that sense of elitism, even though they needed to sell like tickets to the average person, and fighting that battle of who do we allow? Because if we allow people to come into and get one of these box seats at this new opera, then are we really making ourselves seem like we're not quite as elite? And it's almost like you can see them trying to dance this dance.
It's silly to me because I remember I've used this comparison when I talk to my friends who are very particular about grammar and choice of words and not using slang. I tell them all the time, the language you're defending is the slang of a time from before. So
Yes.
This elite metropolitan opera that we have now was where all the old money had no. It was like, you got all the new kids want something fun and new flashy to play with, and now we've treated like this and I'm like, I get it. History keeps repeating himself. Like our grandfathers are always going to think our music is trash. That's going to keep happening from generation to generation. But I guess I just ask the gatekeepers to let it keep happening. Like let the music, let the new stuff happen. And that's, I think, what's hurting the process now. What's keeping the tree from growing? They're not allowing the new branches because they're not the old branches. They don't look like the old ones, and they're not supposed to.
Yeah, that's really great. Well, if it's okay, I want to go to another one of your videos that I think kind of moves us along to the next kind of element that you communicate about a lot with. And this is a video that I found of you talking about Joseph Bologna Chevalier de Saint Georges, the Black Mozart that we shouldn't call him the Black Mozart, but I'll let a little bit of that video play here.
His life should have already been a movie.
They made the movie, and some of you don't even know who this is yet, but you're about to. Joseph Bologna Chevalier de Saint Georges. So stop calling him Black Mozart, because yeah, he was a master composer, but he was also a master fencer, a master violinist, a master marksman, He was born on the island of Guadeloupe in 1745 on Christmas Day to a beautiful Senegalese woman named Nanon. Now, Nanon was enslaved by a minor nobleman who ends up being Joseph's father. But he did claim him, and when the father moved to France, he took Joseph with him and enrolled him in a fencing school. See, if you lived in France in the 1700s and you had money, you fenced. Everyone fenced. That was it. 2 years later, Joseph's the best in the school. No, this was a problem. See, this isn't one of those stories that's like right after slavery. This is still the 1800s. Like, slavery is still big business. Now you got a black kid who's excelling at a French nobleman's sport. He's getting challenged, but he's not getting regular challenges from like Pierre at the school up the block. Nah, he gets challenged by legendary fencing master Alexandre Picard. And he beats him. So now my boy's a famous fencer, and this is when he starts to really get into music. So by the time he's 21, Joseph Bologna is one of Europe's finest swordsmen. So when he's dubbed a knight, he becomes Joseph Bologna, Chevalier de Saint Georges. So now he has a name, he's famous, he's tall, dark, and handsome. He had haters. Now, in 18th century Europe, that means there are going to be some assassination attempts. But my boy had hands that he used to play the violin really, really well. He was so good that his teacher dedicated some of his pieces to him. Then he's playing first violin in France's biggest orchestra, and he's playing concertos that he composed himself. 2 years later, he's directing the orchestra.
It goes on with some more history, but it's such a great, very well-made video. And my question, the reason I wanted to play it, is I'm assuming, and again, you tell me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that your platform there on TikTok had started to grow and grow and grow, and originally coming from some of those viral videos that you had made, and then you started to think, what else can I do to educate people through this platform? So you had to have zeroed in on some of these stories of Black musicians that weren't being told, and saw that as an opportunity. Am I close?
Pretty close. That's a large part of it. When the pandemic happened, Obviously a lot of opera singers weren't working anymore, and so I found a lot of us had a little more courage to be vocal about our complaints about the industry. And so I said some things like, just saying things that have always occurred to me, just as someone who's come to the classical music world later. I think it's easier for me to I kind of have a foot in both worlds. I still get really thrilled every time I hear the classical music songs that all my colleagues are sick and tired of hearing because they've been listening to it all their lives. I still think of it as a British Airways commercial song and get like excited each time. And so I started to become just a little more vocal about these things that I've seen from my opinion. And I found a lot of people in my industry and outside, namely in the industry, felt the same way and felt like no one else had said the same thing. And saying that and making people, I guess, feel seen and validating their thoughts, like, if you don't like classical music, that's okay. It's music from the 1800s. There's not a lot of art forms there. That's fine. So you're not uncultured for not liking it. And people love the way that make them felt. And so I kept sharing more information about things I learned. And one of the things I talked about was the learning about Black composers while I was going through opera school, because opera school felt so foreign to me and everything was new and there was this culture and everyone knew everything and I didn't. But as soon as I found the Black people that were in there before, I was like, oh, okay, it's not that I don't belong here at all. It's just unfamiliar to me. Okay, and I can learn that because they learned that. And for some reason, that just made it a little easier. So I would talk about that as well. And then I learned in the comments of just through interacting how few people knew about many of these musicians are just Black figures in classical music that have been there since the beginning. And so I took it upon myself to start sharing some of this information. And I realized that that I wasn't wrong, that people knew less than I even thought. So I leaned into it I realized I had this platform, all these eyes on me. One of the things I can do is share this information, because these stories, I think, and I talk about this often, every now and then I get in an argument with a colleague who's very passionate about opera, and I have to explain that I love classical music as well, but I want it to be treated, I want the whole story, because I think once we understand everything about like the full story and all the forgotten elements and things that have been left out and gate kept, I think we'll be able to love it more honestly.
Yeah, that's really good. And I agree. And I think loving it more honestly is really a good way to say it, because it'd almost be like if my wife and if I was talking to my wife and was telling her or asking her if she loved me, but then I went ahead and I listed out certain things. But you can't consider my temper. You can't consider that one mean thing that I did to you 20 years ago. But other than that, do you love me?
Right.
It would be completely inauthentic, and it wouldn't really be the definition of loving someone or something, because part of that means you take the bad with the good. But if we're not going to talk about the bad, then we're not really
right. Then we don't want it to be better.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I have another question about that. So one of the observations that I've made on this topic, because of course I'm old. I'm probably most of my education in classical music happened in the late 1990s. I didn't learn I don't think I learned about any of the Black classical music composers that I now know about. I learned about all of those in the last 5 or 6 years, including the one in that video that we just learned about, right? And so I think that one of the things that I've noticed since learning more and more about that history is that we tend to still call certain types of music, we call them white music, or we call them even Black music, or et cetera. And I think that sometimes that's well-intentioned in the sense that people are trying to like highlight where diversity improvements are needed. But I think in some ways, especially I notice this with students, young kids tend to not understand the nuances of those types of terms. Mm-hmm. And I worry that with my Black students, because I've got a lot of them, that when they hear certain types of music or white music, then in a lot of ways what they might hear is, well, that's not for me. That's mm-hmm. not the kind of music that I should like. Is that something is that a tension you've ever noticed? Or what do you think about that?
It's tricky because it's it's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing. A
Yeah.
lot of times they're really describing. So on the one hand, they're saying like they hear it and it's like, oh, I'm not familiar with it, so it's white people music, and just like writing it off as that and like meaning it's not for me. At the same time, they're communicating an experience that they've had. It's like there's a lot of us that have felt like, for instance, as an opera singer, one of the things I've been a part of with opera companies is community outreach programs. And what they often do is a large opera company will have a small group of performers go out and do an English version of a popular opera that has like a lot of like catchy tunes. And very often these small casts that go out to the community, they're the most diverse cast that the opera company is dealing with ethnically. And then when these people see it, they're like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying this music, regardless of like, it's on this new introduction, I'm enjoying the music. So they show up at the opera house and they get there and no one in the audience looks like them. No one on stage looks like them. And they internalize, oh, this is white music. And so they have kids, they go, when their kids have this interest in this thing, their parents are going to say, oh yeah, white music. I know that's right. White music. And they're speaking from a very honest experience. And so it does feed into something that's not true.
Right.
It does like communicate that. And however, I think people will, especially now where music is, I saw a Billboard article not too long ago talking about the increase in people listening to classical music. And one of the upsides about streaming is they can just access it whenever they want. They don't have to get dressed up. They don't have to listen to it the right way. They don't know what it is. They just hear it and they like it. And I think because the gatekeepers aren't there, more people are allowed to enjoy it and they are enjoying it. And I think I guess how would I put a button on that? Because people show a genuine interest in it, and I'm seeing that happen, I think a lot of the onus is on the organizations or the music industry to genuinely make it so that story doesn't keep happening.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's a really interesting angle on it. I agree with all of that. I think that sometimes those types of gatekeepers stepping aside can help break down some of those walls, especially when young kids see artists like yourself, especially if in areas of just representation. Like, do people who look like me do this kind of music? And now in our current technological age, I don't know that teenagers oftentimes think of it that explicitly. They don't like sit down at the Google machine or whatever and say, one of my teachers showed me this opera song, but I better go check and make sure if Black people also do it. Like they don't.
Right.
But with TikTok accounts like yours out there, and lots of kids are on there, and you have lots of followers and all of that. The people of all types of shapes and sizes and colors are doing all types of music from all over the world, and kids can see that now more without having to go through those gatekeepers. And I see that as a positive thing for the future of even classical music. Is that something you see too?
I do. I genuinely, I feel like at this point, I think the gatekeepers have done more harm than good. And I think it might just be as simple, as we've said, they've been part of this elite class for so long, and the people who've made it in, who get the keys to the gate, are part of that. And how to connect and how to relate to the populace, the intention is right, but it's just the understanding. For instance, being fully aware that it's not white people music. I'll post a video and refer to it as white people music, knowing that it validates something that these people felt. Like if I tell them like, no, it's not white people music, it's like, that's funny because my mom said and my grandmother said and all my friends who've gone and said the same thing. So you saying it's not, I don't trust you.
That's a good point.
And if I'm honest with them, it's like, oh yeah, so that white people music, okay. Here's the thing about it. Yeah, you're gonna probably feel uncomfortable about it, but here's why you shouldn't. here's a real story about it. A lot of these people don't know, but you know, and just having a fuller story and sharing it with everyone, maybe the other people in the seats will make these people feel less uncomfortable when they show up. And maybe these people just feel a little more emboldened to check out these spaces as we make these transitions to where it becomes more comfortable for them.
That is a really good point. And I appreciate that because that is something that as a certified white, I have never thought about that before, to be honest. Like I didn't thought about the idea that I could with all the best intentions tell someone that it's actually not white music, but then not realize that the wheels are spinning in the back of their head. But I've had all these experiences that show me that it's white people music. So I'm not. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that validating someone's experience as again one of those bridges before you can teach them something is extremely important. Yeah, so that's really good. And I also want to say something too, and I want to get your take on this idea of gatekeepers, because we've kind of been talking about it throughout the whole conversation, using that term. And I have a hot take about that term as well, which is that I don't think, and yes, there are definitely snobby, elitist, racist gatekeepers in classical music. There are those. They do exist. And I don't want to act like I don't want people to think that I think they don't exist.
Right.
But I actually don't think that describes most of the gatekeepers. I think that most of the gatekeepers think they are being inclusive. In other words, they think that with the best intentions, they think that all of this pomp and circumstance and elite infrastructure and wear your tuxedo to the opera and all of these things, I think that they believe that these things impress people and will cause them to come. And I think it's just a lack of being willing to reflect on, well, let's look at the receipts. People aren't coming. People come once and they never come back. So we might have, like, all the things that we think, and I think, again, it comes down to the simple human bias, which is that if I'm that gatekeeper, I like the music this way. I like to hear it this way. I like to wear my nice outfit when I go to the thing, and so I can go to dinner at a nice place afterwards. And these are things I enjoy. And so if I enjoy them, you will enjoy them. And I think that just misunderstands how humans work. Thoughts?
Right. I agree strongly. I think the most effective gatekeepers don't know they're the gatekeepers.
There you go.
Yeah. I think I unfortunately they're just living their life. However, they understand the culture. They understand the music. For whatever reason, they were born on the inside of the gate, or they have access. They're on the inside of the gate, and it's normal to them. So, what I guess some of the ways this will be frictiony, but going back to the last analogy, this black kid shows up and he's like interested. He's having a conversation, and someone who genuinely wants him, someone in the audience, someone who's been a fan of classical music, who's really kind of tired of like the old classical stuff and wants it to be new, tells this person like, hey, no, it's not. This is not white music. This is not white people music. Like there's a place for it. Like this is for you too. And once again, he knows that, okay, everyone, all he's experienced and everyone he respects have told him otherwise. You're a stranger to tell him that. Now that person has now become one of the other people reinforcing the idea that they're not there, in the sense that there's this experience of how do I put it? It almost feels like drinking the Kool-Aid. Like, okay. You know that it's white people's music based on all your life experience. This person's just going to tell you it's not. And either you just like believe it and just discount everything without anything really proving otherwise, or you realize it's not. And I think, or you just realize, okay, the people who are reaching out to me, the outreach people for this organization, they're also full of it. They're also, this is definitely not for me. Like the ones who the representatives are they're accidentally giving up more. They're telling on themselves. This is not for me. And I think, so I guess offering solutions, how do you get around that is, when I talk to organizations, I say you're going to have to really develop an actual like real relationship with these communities. and not just like for outreach or for fundraising or certain times, certain holidays. Like figure out what it is they want and then provide that as an entertainment entity. But it's going to require like honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that's really well said too. And I think with classical music, to take this back to one of the things you said earlier too, which is that people want to enjoy it, but they don't feel like they have permission to. I threw in that in some cases, I don't think it's that they don't know how. There's certain educational aspects. I do wish organizations were more intentional about outreach during the concerts, not like having a concert and then having the outreach as being like a side arm to raise money or whatever, but but that the outreach is built into the concert to bridge that gap between themselves and the audience member who doesn't know what to listen for, et cetera. But I also think that when we're trying to tackle this problem, it really does, at least this is my bias because I'm a teacher, but it comes down to how we choose to, or how we educate kids and young people, et cetera. In a lot of ways, they're going to learn a lot more about this stuff from people like you than they will from me, because they're only going to be in my classroom for a few years. They are saturated in the culture their whole lives, right? So I think these things are very important. So yeah, I think that's really, really good. I do have one more, before we wrap this up, one more little angle I want to get your take on, and this is just an observation from, again, watching a lot of your content and then now having this conversation. Because I'm a real big believer in this idea in general that music is the best bridge builder. There I am, bridge builder across cultures and even across time and continent, etc. I think it's very powerful in that way when it's delivered really well. And so I want to make sure I have your story right. You were in Nigeria until age of 13-ish. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, as somebody who now does classical operatic singing mixed with hip hop from the West Coast of the United States, you are doing two art forms that are not your cultural heritage natively, and you're making them into something new that is unique and interesting. And to me, I see that as an incredible example of the way I wish we could all look at music. Is that they don't have to it's okay to put kimchi on my taco. If I like how it tastes, I should be able to put kimchi on my taco. So is that something you have ever thought about, in the sense that why couldn't I come up to you and say, well, where's your Nigerian indigenous music? Why aren't you doing that on your channel? That kind of thing. Thoughts about that?
Well, I've had that conversation. It's something I've toyed with, but what I love about this is I say, because people ask me sometimes, are you Nigerian? Are you African American? And I'm like, okay, what counts as an African American? Like how far? Like exactly. I'm African American and I'm Nigerian, because what those terms mean encompass a lot of different things. Yep. And so, that being true that I'm Nigerian and I'm born in the U.S., so I took in a lot of hip hop. It makes sense that would be what I'm using. Those are the tools I'm most familiar with, or those would be the tools that I would be using to make what I'm making. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're saying is, well, with the food analogy, I think is exactly the case. Like some people like kimchi on their tacos. And now that we have like Trader Joe's, you can make that happen at home. Hell, if you live in the right part of the country, you can go to a restaurant that makes that professionally. Yeah. However, you can still get pure kimchi. You can still get tacos, both probably on the same street. Uh-huh. The good stuff, the classics aren't going away just because. And I think, like we were saying earlier, with the absence of gatekeepers, with like streaming, just I can access the music the way I want to. I can listen to who is telling me about opera. I can pick who that is because it's on my phone. I think people are finding the voices that speak to them, and I think within this music, the same thing is happening. People will find the music that speaks to them because, yes, a lot of music has a lot of cultural identity attached to it, and that is fine. That will remain. but allowing the fusions, I guess, to happen will not end that cultural identity. That will the cultural music, the cultural food, and the attachment, the relationship that will still be there. But I think the we've always had trade with other cultures, and we've always had, you know, the merchants show up wearing garments from another land, and that's how we've got. Once again, we're essentially this defending the slang of yesteryears.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And you don't become any less Nigerian when you rap,
Right.
nor do you become less black when you sing an opera song. Right.
Right.
I think that's another way to say what you just said, which is that these
Agreed.
cultural identities are not going to go away because we're toying around with our musical ingredients that we find interesting. You know, I bring up this example every once in a while because ethnically, you know, of course, there's lots of white ethnicities on the planet. There's lots
Right.
of black ethnicities on the planet. And ethnically, I am a different ethnicity than my wife. We both are in America. We're both white, but she and I are of different ethnic backgrounds. And my ethnic background is Germanic. Hers is Slavic. And so because I enjoy singing a song that is in German, not because I have any connection to German culture, but because I just think I sound good when I do it. Right?
That makes sense.
I want a world where our students, like the young people that watch your channel, but also the ones that come and take my class, I want it to be that simple for them. I want it to be as simple as I just like how I sound when I sing this, or I just like to listen to this. And I don't want to be told that I can't because of who I am or where I come from. And I think your channel is just like a walking, living example of that.
Right.
No pressure. I don't mean.
No. Thank you. I appreciate it. I've found a lot of peace in just trying to maintain myself and just be who I am and let people see that. And it's been keeping me focused on that. So as you were talking, I was thinking of fusion food and sushi.
Yeah.
And at what point does your fusion become disrespectful to sushi? And I found that the difference, what I found is good fusion. This is fun. I love having these conversations and coming to these from other angles. Good fusion usually happens when someone has a clear understanding and respect for both of the elements being fused.
Agreed.
Good, like sushi, or kimchi tacos are going to happen when a guy knows how to make good tacos and good kimchi and understands stuff behind. So I found or even in school when we're doing performances in opera school, we're doing performances of Negro spirituals or African American art songs. The best performers of that, when white people did it, the best performances of those were from those who understood the culture, who understood why I'm saying wade in the water instead of wade in the water, because that's the proper, that would be the proper, and have done that study. And, you know, the best opera singers have studied opera, have studied Italian language and diction and culture and so on and so forth. And so I think the same thing applies in the future with music. Like, I think what I'm doing is successful because I grew up in hip hop and I'm fully trained in opera. And I think that's why I'm more successful than a lot of people who have tried to combine the two before, because, and I guess that's what I think is the beauty of the freedom in the exploration of the fusion, because what will survive, what will be true, usually will come from those who respect the classics.
Yeah.
And so they're not going anywhere.
Yep.
They're also going to protect those as well.
Yeah.
Like the best new age guitar players defend the oldies more than anyone else.
Right.
Those who are breaking all the rules.
I love that. In fact, what was coming to my mind is that in a lot of ways, the phenomenon you just described is why when I was growing up, for example, Eminem, the rapper, was pretty well respected and accepted by the American hip hop black community. Why? Right. Because of how he grew up and his understanding of the cultural music tradition that he was getting into. He was friends with all those guys. He was raised in the same way that a lot of those other rappers were. And so he was, I mean, you can find crazies on the internet, but for the most part, he was not being accused of cultural appropriation. He was not, his albums were selling in the black community just like they were in the white community,
Right.
and I think that had he been, the suburban kid from, who knows where, and just had heard rap on TV and started making it up, like, I think that authenticity would have been lacking, and he would have been getting a lot more criticism than he did. Thoughts about that?
I agree. And I honestly, I don't think he would have made as good. I don't think it was possible for him to make as good, as high quality hip hop as he was making without that authentic connection to the same culture or very similar culture that hip hop originally grew from. And I have a lot of respect for Eminem. I was there for the beginning of that and I was an Eminem hater in the beginning and then watched it slowly. I was a kid in high school. And so, and what I loved about him is, like, because I'm not sure if it was deliberate or he had no other option, but as you said, he stayed within the hip hop community and culture. When he went to market his music to the radio stations, here's the thing. At that time, there was almost like a script where if there was a white artist who became popular with black music, like in Southern California, there's Power 106 is a hip hop station, and there was K-Rock, which was the rock and roll station. And if you were a white artist that did something that kind of rappy, you ended up on K-Rock. That's where they played it. You went to that station because they were gonna. Eminem didn't do that. I mean, he might have said, but he went to the black radio stations first, and he knew there'd be scrutiny, and he owned it, and he stood his ground and kept the music within the community, kept marketing it to the people, and he never did the thing where he just played ball, and I think that's why there was so much outrage, where he never tried to take it away from the community, the hip hop community, and take it to the suburbs. He stayed true. And I don't know if it's that he couldn't because he didn't understand it, or he just knew he's had no, I think it's that he knew, because I think one of the benefits for him of growing up in that culture, he just kind of grew up with that same type of respect that other people in the culture would have.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I did not expect to wrap up this conversation with Eminem, but I love that I love that that's how we did. I really appreciate your time. This has been really, really fun, and I encourage everybody to go find your TikTok channel if they don't already have it. I can put links to that in the show notes, and I'll include some little sample clips of the videos so that people can find you. And I'll also put, if you are down with that, I'll also put any links to like live concert stuff that you've got going on, and hopefully get the word out to the music.
Sounds good. Okay. Take care.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. If you are still listening, that means you're one of the people who are MVPs of the Choralosophy Podcast, the people who stick around to the end. Of course, the ways to help are to use the Choralosophy promo code at sightreadingfactory.com, mymusicfolders.com, 3minutetheory.com, endeavormusicpublishing.com, graphitepublishing.com, and of course you can join the Patreon. Link is in the show notes. You can also subscribe at Substack and chip in a few dollars a month there. All of those things are great ways to help, and of course like, share, leave comments, be part of the conversation. That's what this is all about. See you guys next time.